Somebody, oh, Ashwin's here. Hi, Ashwin. Good to see you. We just started the recording. Now that Ashwin is here, we have started the recording. Um, okay, this is our final official Zoom meeting, unless you all absolutely require that we have another meeting. This is it. And I'm so glad you all came. I'm sure more kids will be coming in, but we're going to get started. So we're talking about the 2019 practice exam. And how many of you had a chance to do it yet? Tabitha, Sonnet, good, 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 good. And if anybody has any, oh, hi, Joseph, good to see you. If anyone has any special questions that you want me to be sure to go over because they were confusing or odd, or you just don't understand what they were thinking, let me know. Hi, Chloe, good to see you. For our last, this is going to be sentimental, kids. We'll have to get out some hankies and um, our last time together. Uh, hey, Gail, good to see you. Good to see you. For our last meeting, are your little brothers going to be able to come or just you tonight?
We'll all be joining.
Oh, great. Excellent. We haven't gotten started. We just have started the recording. And I know you had a chance to do the 2019 practice exam and did well. The class did really well. And I hope we'll be able to clear up some problems. And I know we've got a few kids here who weren't here. Well, maybe just Cal. Um, that did you all notice anything about the order of the questions on this exam and compared to the last one? Sebastian and a little brother, it looks like.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Good to see you. Um, well, future A pusher here. Uh, um, nothing like getting started early. So if any of you have, um, what did you notice about the order of the questions? Once again, similar to the 2018 one. Sonnet, what did you notice?
They were kind of ascending in like time period, like it started early and then went later.
Just like our PSDAs or something, huh? In fact, they started like our PSDAs. Did you all recognize that first image? I hope you did. Did you all say, oh my gosh, I know that? We'll get back to it. I'm going to share my screen in just a second.
It was too long ago. I don't remember what it was anymore.
Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Hey, Aiden, good to see you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen with the questions. I'm moving you guys around on the top. Oh, good, Saraga's here. Terrific. Good to see you. And Joyce, good to see you. Great. We're getting some kids who haven't been able to come most of the years. This is great. Okay, so here is the last push for A push, kids. Okay. And I chose questions to go over that at least some kids in the class missed the question. And so I thought those would be the most useful to go over. Most of you did really well. I'm really proud of how you all did. Shows you have developed good historical thinking skills this year. Okay, did anyone recognize this picture that you can see on my screen? Helen, you did. How did you know this picture?
I can't remember exactly, but I think we analyzed it, didn't we?
We
Or at least looked
did.
at it.
We did. It was our very first PSDA of the year because it was early in the year. And that seems to be how they organize the exam now. They do it by These, they do it by, they go up in time periods. And again, that can just help you a little bit. Like if you're on question 8 on the exam, you can be sure that they are not talking about Ronald Reagan, okay? They're going to be talking early. And if it's question 50, they're not going to be talking about early colonization. So it'll keep your mind moving. And as we go through them, we're going to go through them from the early to the end. Hi, Allocate, good to see you. This will be a good review for you because, the earlier things might be a little weaker in your mind because you haven't, visited them recently. But yes, this image was our very first PSDA. So you might want to go over tomorrow and look over what did I write about it? What did I think about it then? And you all did a really good job on it. Okay, so there were some people who missed this one. So let's look at these, okay? This is the village of Sikatan in North Carolina. Okay. So let's look at this question. Can you all read the print? Should I make it bigger or is it okay? You can read it? Okay, good. Okay, I'll read the question. The image best serves as evidence that many Native American groups had developed farming techniques that, okay, so first of all, we're specifically looking at their farming techniques, not their religious beliefs or the way they built their houses. Okay, we're looking at their farming techniques. They had developed farming techniques that A, spread tobacco cultivation throughout the continent, B, supported permanent villages, C, allowed for continuous warfare, D, oh, Roshan has given us the thumbs up, thumbs down. D, differed dramatically from English agricultural practices. So which answer do you think is right? There were kids who got this one wrong. Sebastian, what do you think? After you finish.
I think it must be B because Native Americans weren't really the ones who like widely cultivated tobacco. Smoking wasn't really a thing for them. C, there's not really evidence that it is tobacco in the image, right? Also, no evidence of warfare or evidence that their agriculture practices are significantly different from English ones.
Yeah.
Maybe they were, but it's sure not shown in the image.
Yeah, in a sense, it's almost, I remember some of you wrote that in your initial response that, oh, they're planting in rows. It kind of looks like it could be an English garden or an English, field. Yeah, but the permanent villages, that's considered the best response. Ephraim.
I got this one wrong because I thought it was D because when it said that it would differ from English agricultural practices, I
Mhm.
was thinking about how they fenced off their properties and built centralized towns. So would
Yeah,
that be like
I mean,
would that
you could, this is an example of how it could be a good discussion question. And you could make the point, like, yeah, there's some significant differences here. And that would probably be like in a multiple choice question, that would be too fine a difference. They're going to look at big things, big things, not, and again, here they've got a little area. They're not just going out and foraging wild plants here. Obviously, they're planting selective plants. It looks like they're weeding them. It looks like they're taking care of them. They do seem to have them a little bit fenced off. But yeah, I could see that was the answer, that there was at least one other student from who also chose that. You were not the only one.
I think I might have been the other student.
Right. And that's almost an example of thinking too deeply. That would be like me. My favorite example of this type of thinking, Ephraim, is when I was 13, a local neighbor was getting her degree as a school psychologist, and she had to give a whole bunch of kids IQ tests. So I thought this would be really fascinating to have an IQ test done. And I thought I was really brilliant, so I would do well. And she starts out with saying, well, Susie, the questions will start out easy and then they'll get harder. Well, here's the first question. How are red and green alike? I almost sweat bullets because I'm thinking, I was an artsy kid. I knew about the color wheel. I'm thinking, alike? They're opposites on the color wheel. How can they be alike? Oh my gosh, I must be really stupid. And she could tell, luckily, she probably wasn't supposed to do this, but she could tell that I was really overthinking it. And she finally says, Susie, I think you might be making this harder than it is. All you really have to say is, they're both colors. I'm like, they're both colors. Oh, I was making it much, much harder. So yeah, that would be a good example of that. They're not expecting students to know about the fine details of English agriculture at that time. But yeah, the permanent settlement idea, that would be, these don't look like they're going to pack up these, little wigwams and put them on their backs and move to a new place next week. They're going to stay there. So yeah, that's a good one. Okay, the next question, 3 people missed. So let's look at it, okay? By the early 1600s, which of the following had most changed the circumstances of villages such as Sikatan in Eastern North America? Okay, now first of all, you have to notice what's the date of this picture? It's 1590. Okay, that was when it was made. This is before, remember James White, the guy who did these pictures, became the governor or the man in charge of the Roanoke settlement? Okay, so 10, 20 years later, which of the following had most changed the circumstances of villages such as this one? Okay, A, the establishment of permanent settlements by English colonists, the impact of epidemic diseases introduced by Europeans, C, the decline of the fur and beaver trades, or D, the introduction of new foods into the Native American diet. Okay, let's hear from Sonnet and then Tabitha and then Sebastian, who's raising his hand properly.
I was actually just gonna ask a question because this one
Sure.
confused me. I got this one wrong. I said A instead of I think.
That was the popular wrong choice.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask, 'cause the reason I didn't pick, I don't know if I should give away, but the one that didn't pick B is
Yeah.
because I wasn't sure if epidemic diseases affected North America as much as they did South
Oh.
America, because I
Oh,
feel like
yeah.
we focus more. So they did.
They really
Okay.
did. They
I was just gonna
absolutely
clarify 'cause
did.
I didn't.
Yeah, so
think about
so
that.
you've learned something. If you have to tell me, Sonnet, at the end of this year's APUSH exam, if they have any questions about the impact of epidemic diseases, and they definitely did impact South America, Central America, but they also really impacted North America even before there were major settlements. Like I actually read, you probably don't remember this, but I gave you a link to the book where these images were printed up. And this whole book about this expedition where they were going around visiting all these places and describing their habits and everything. And they actually described in there rather naively and with surprise and not realizing why it was happening, but they said, oh, we've been getting reports that after we leave a village, people start dying, getting sick. We don't understand it. I mean, they didn't understand about how diseases might spread. And it was a terrible problem. And often in North America, what would happen when just these trading groups or these exploration groups would come in, not even permanent settlements, that people would get sick and then they would flee from their village to another village. And then what would happen? That village gets sick, and then and those people would flee. And so they just kept spreading because we always, I think many people would have kind of a view that, oh yeah, well, the Indians, I mean, they didn't have wheels or horses or anything. They probably just stayed put. You were in a village, you stayed there all your whole life. But that was not the case. There was a surprising bit of trade and communication between these Indian villages and settlements, and they would spread disease from people from these, more eastern villages that had been impacted by these traders coming by. Or remember with the Plymouth colony with the Pilgrims, that when the Pilgrims landed there, does anyone remember what they found when they decided, okay, this is going to be where we're going to make our settlement? Anyone remember what they noticed? Well, I'll tell you, kids. What they noticed was, oh, this was a village. People had been living here. Indians had been living here, but they're not here any longer. They're dead. They're gone. They must have died. And they viewed it from their point of view. They viewed it as, it's the hand of God. God must be saying, I opened the way for your settlement. That's the way they looked at it. And they just didn't understand, what was, how things were being caused and what was happening. But like most of the Indians, or a lot of the Indians had already died because of epidemic diseases spread by European casual traders coming through. Because people had, even though there weren't permanent settlements, people had been dipping in and saying, hey, you got any furs? Do you want to trade with us? They've been doing that for 50 years, and it had already had an impact. So yeah, that's why I'm glad you specifically had the courage, Sana, to mention that was a confusing question for you, and it was for a couple of other kids too. So yeah, big impact of European colonization, epidemic diseases. Just, salivate when you hear that, okay? It's epidemic diseases is the correct answer. Did you have something to add, Sebastian? You had your hand up at one point, but it might have just been left up. Okay. Okay, moving on. Okay, we have this map, and this we had, okay, so this is a map. Who can tell us, well, who can describe just briefly what we're looking at here? Let me make it a little smaller so we can see. Who can share in 1 minute or less what we're seeing here? Tabitha. Tabitha, do you want
I
to?
think that we're seeing a map of Spanish colonization. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think that we are seeing a map of the Spanish colonization of Florida in the mid 1500s, and also some French, because Fort Caroline was a French colony.
Right. For Caroline, yeah, that's a French colony. The Huguenots, anyone know what religion the Huguenots were? That's an interesting thing. Ephraim?
They're Protestant.
They were the Protestants, and France was officially a Catholic country. And they thought it was pretty good to have these Huguenots leave, just like the British thought it was a pretty good idea to have these crazy pilgrims and Puritans. They want to go, great. We're happy to have them leave. So yeah, but then the Spanish attacked them. Okay, so that's our map. It's Florida. We don't have anyone here who lives in Florida, do we? I don't think so. Okay, so question 13, really everybody got, or just about everybody, but the next one, we had 3 people who got it wrong, all in different ways. So let's look at this one. Okay, which of the following was a major difference between the Spanish colonies? Let me make this a little bigger. Between the Spanish colonies in the Americas in the 1500s and the English colonies in the Americas in the early 1600s. Okay, so what's the major difference? So we've got A, the Spanish adopted African slavery in their colonies, while the English relied more on American Indian labor. Roshan says, nah, bam. Okay. Or B, the Spanish more actively sought to convert American Indians to Christianity than did the English. People are saying, yeah, okay. But let's look at the others. The Spanish tried to change American Indian worldviews, while the English generally accommodated them. And that one could be tempting because, first of all, if they tried to convert them, that's changing their worldviews. So that first part could be viewed as correct, but to say the English generally just accommodated them, not so much. Okay, but let's look at the last one, which at least one person in the class thought was correct, so it was confusing. The Spanish rejected assimilating American Indians into their culture, while the English favored assimilation. And again, this is very early 1600s. We're talking Jamestown and maybe the beginning of the Pilgrims. They weren't that big on assimilation of the Indians. That would later become a theme of, why can't these Indians just assimilate and become Americans, and own property and this sort of thing. But here that was not really the push. So yeah, the best one would be sought more actively to convert the American Indians to Christianity, which in their case would be, their brand would be Catholicism, of course. Okay, we're moving right along. Okay, the next set of questions, moving chronologically, is about the Mayflower Compact. And the first two questions, everyone got right. Number 7, a couple of kids got wrong, so let's look at it. So we've got the Mayflower Compact. Who can tell us what the Mayflower Compact basically was? To review, since that's what we're doing here. How about Sebastian and then Ephraim, if you have something else to add?
It was the compact signed by the Pilgrims on the Mayflower. I think before it was it says right there, it was the governing document of the Plymouth colony, the rules
Right.
they agreed to live under.
Right. And it's very general. It's basically saying, we shall make laws. They're not saying really what those laws will be, but they will make laws and we will obey them. And yeah. Okay, so let's look at number 7, which is the one that gave people some challenge. It says, participation in the civil body politic, which is a quote. See if you can find it right here. Do you see? Participation in the civil body politic referenced in the excerpt would have been most available to which of the following? A, members of the English nobility. B, okay, I see a lot of boo. Some people thought that was correct. B, sailors and soldiers. C, male church members. Or D, indentured servants. Yeah, we'll give special privileges to the indentured servants. That sounds like that was the way our history went. Yeah, probably not. Yeah, and the sailors and soldiers, who's that even referring to there? Who are the sailors and soldiers referring to the Pilgrims, Plymouth colonies? Sonnet?
They would have still British, probably. I mean, because the sailors probably would just go back and forth between Britain and America. So
yeah, they probably didn't stay there permanently, right? They were heading back, but they were probably there like maybe they were there over the winter. I don't know. That would be something to look up. But yeah, they were the ones on board the ship, and there might have been some soldiers who stayed on to kind of defend the colony. Who knows? They probably were, but yeah, they might not have been church members. That was a pretty select group. You had to. Anyone remember how you became a church member of the Pilgrims or Puritan groups? Anyone remember that? Tabitha?
You had to be accepted by the elders of the church. I think you also had to be baptized, correct? It was kind of complicated.
I somehow the sound was a little odd. Can you say that again?
I think you had to be approved by the elders of the church or something like that. And you also had to
Yeah.
be baptized.
Yeah, you had to go through a procedure of actually coming before the church body, the elders, and giving your conversion story of why you felt that you were chosen by God, how you know that you were going to receive God's grace, that sort of thing, which was very hard. And they were always very anxious about that. Am I really chosen? Am I not chosen? Am I damned? Am I not? They were always really nervous about that. And but they had to come and try to make their case or give their conversion story. So yeah, it was pretty heavy duty. But yeah, members of the English nobility, do you think most of those pilgrims would be nobles? Those are lords and ladies, that's not who was immigrating in that group. These were, they weren't lower class, but they were more like, lower middle class, that sort of thing. And some of them were lawyers and stuff, but they were they were not nobility. Okay. So moving on. Okay, the next one, we've got two that I want to look at. Okay, this is the Declaration. Is it the Declaration of Independence or something else, some other declaration? What declaration is this? And what's its context? Why did they make this declaration at that time? What are they declaring? How about Helen?
This was the declaration for why they wanted to take up arms because they felt that because of all of the things like the Stamp Act, they weren't being treated like full English subjects, so they felt they were being treated unfairly, so they took up arms to protest against that.
Yeah. And this, good points. And this is 1775. What, did anyone remember the date of the Stamp Act? Like how much before was that? Tabitha?
Is it 1774?
It was earlier. It was 10 years earlier.
Oh, yeah.
1765, right after some war. What war was the Stamp Act right after? Helen.
The Seven Years' War or the French and Indian War.
Good, good, good. She's been reviewing, kids. Great. Yeah, right after the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, and which from our point of view took more than 7 years. That's why we don't call it that. And so it is 10 years later. And of course, it was started by this feeling of not being treated like Englishmen that Helen brought up, started like right then with that Stamp Act stuff, or the Proclamation of 1763. But here, anyone know something that happened in April of 1775? Few good dates to know. Ephraim and then Roshan.
The Lexington and Concord. Shot
Yeah.
heard around the world.
Shot heard around the world. Boom. Right. Um, there has been a shooting war happening. It's no longer just taxes. They're the patriots, the US, the colonists are viewing it as we have been shot at and we were totally innocent. We didn't do a thing, not our fault. I mean, we were smuggling arms and we were doing all this stuff, but they shot us. And of course, no one really knows who shot the first shot. But anyway, from the British point of view, the American colonists were guilty. They were treasonous, they were whatever. But the colonists viewed it differently. It's one of those situations, like many in history, where the point of view can be radically different, just like in today's world. It's not the first time there have been different points of views on the same thing. So let's look at question 8, because this was a tough one for a lot of people. The issuing of the declaration in the excerpt best serves as evidence of the A, patriot inclusion of abolitionism as a goal of the resistance, B, sonnet says no, boo, boo hiss. B, the desire of the majority of colonists to launch offensive attacks against the British. Yeah, because offense means you're the one shooting first. The colonists, do you think the colonists would ever admit, even if they knew it was true, that they had fired the first shot at Lexington? Never. Why did Lincoln want the South to fire the first shot at Sumter, Fort Sumter, in the Civil War? Roshan?
Because if they fired the first shot, then you look like the good guy who's just defending himself.
We're defending the Union. They fired the first shot. Yeah, Lincoln was not going to fire the first shot. He wasn't going to have his Fort Sumter guys fire a cannon on South Carolina. If there was going to be a war, they were going to start it. Okay, that's pretty standard warfare theory everywhere, that you want to, does your side wants to show that the other side was totally in the wrong because they fired the first shot. They were the aggressors. We were merely defending our honor, our homeland, our possessions, our freedom. Okay. And so, yeah, they're not going to try offensive attacks. It's like offensive and defensive in football or something, or soccer. Not that I know anything about these sports, but those would be the aggressors, the ones who are coming in, but they're not saying that. C, efforts of colonists to protect their rights as English subjects. Yay, that's it. That's what Helen brought up, that they were defending their rights as British subjects, not as free and independent Americans, but as British subjects. There are rights. Or D, colonial demand for complete independence from Britain. That was still a year away. 1 year away. 1 year away. This is July 1775, July 1776. Declaration of Independence, not just taking up arms. So they're kicking it up a notch, okay? Here they're still claiming to be loyal colonists, loyal British citizens living in America, okay? So, very good. Okay, number 10 also gave people some trouble, so let's look at that one. Which of the following pieces of evidence could best be used to challenge the assertion in the excerpt that British attacks on the colonists had been unprovoked? So we want examples of provoked attacks, like the British were defending themselves, okay? So let's look at those. A, the extension of a petition of reconciliation by members of the Second Continental Congress. Do you even know what that means? Is this unclear? Helen says no, boo, boo hiss. Yeah, that sounds too reconciliatory to prove that the colonists were provoking things. We want something that's going to show the colonists in a bad light, right? B, a series of popular boycotts, mob protests, and violence against royal officials. Yes, 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 yes. Tabitha's getting excited over here, right? Yep, that's the one because, and can any of you think of any examples of these sorts of popular boycotts, mob protests, or violence against royal officials? How about Helen and then Roshan and then Ephraim?
I thought of the Boston Tea Party, which I think happened like 1773 or something.
Yes, exactly. So that would have been just shortly before, right? Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and that was certainly, the Britain would have viewed that as, boy, are they ever trying to provoke us? Ephraim, what do you see as an example?
Feather and tarring royal officials.
Yeah, tarring and feathering, right? or hanging effigies of, little stuffed scarecrows that were labeled, so and so. And also there was like I don't know if he was a governor or some sort of royal official in Boston whose house was absolutely ransacked and smashed. And, he had very nice stuff. He was rich and totally ransacked because he was viewed as being in cahoots with the British government. Sonnet, do you have something else here?
I was gonna say, I think there's a movement for like housewives to spin their own clothing so they wouldn't have to buy from the British.
Yes, that would be an example of the boycotts, right? And they would say, they're trying to provoke it. They're not even going to trade with us. Why do they think we put them there? So they can trade with us. And we can trade with them and make money from them. Ah, terrible. They're provoking us, right? Yeah, there was a big thing, homespun outfits were now all the rage. So yeah, excellent. Okay. And we didn't read the next choices because it's always interesting to read the wrong choices. Efforts by Quakers and Germans in the mid-Atlantic colonies to promote pacifism and remain neutral. That's just the opposite. That would have been unprovoking things, The British loved those They didn't love the Quakers so much when they were living back in England. They were throwing them in jail. But if they're over there and saying, oh, we shouldn't fight. No, we're all pacifists. No, we're not going to fight the British. How terrible. We just can't do it. We cannot bear arms. We can't do this. The British loved that. So they took over Philadelphia quite nicely because it was mostly a Quaker city. So yeah, it's not going to be that. And D, the outbreak of skirmishes between Patriot and Loyalist forces throughout the southern colonies. Why is that one not right? That happened. Roshan, why is that not a good answer here?
Because that's still colonists fighting against colonists. It's just colonists who disagree. The loyalists weren't officially part of Britain's army or anything like that. It wasn't aggression against Great Britain.
Right, exactly. It's like a big deal. They want to fight among each other. No problem. Let them fight it out. It's kind of like that quip that many of you noticed in one of the DBQs about World War II. Truman saying about Germany and Russia in early World War II. It's like, well, if the Germans are winning, we should help the Russians. And if the Russians are winning, we should help the Germans. And that way, let them kill off each other. And, be that sort of thing. What do they care if the colonists are fighting among themselves? Great. What they wouldn't want probably would be united colonists who were united together to fight the British. They want to fight with each other. Great. We're all for it. Okay, very good, very good. Oh, and here we're going to look at this one. One person missed this one. So that's not many, but it's an interesting question because it reminds us of something we should all remember. Which of the following most immediately built on the ideas expressed in the excerpt? And that phrase, most immediately, most directly, think of it in terms of most soon afterwards, okay? Followed most closely. Like in 6 months or a year, this next thing will happen. Not something that's going to come 10 years later or 20 years later, okay? It's going to be quick, 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 okay? So which of the following most immediately built on the ideas expressed in the excerpt? So it's building on it. It's not exactly the same. It's going to build on to take it to the next level. A, the publication of the pamphlet Common Sense. B, the drafting of the U.S. Constitution. Too far in the future. That's, more than 10 years away. That was the answer that one person wanted. But again, if they say most immediately, you think 1 year or less, okay? 1 year or less. C, the issuing of George Washington's farewell address. That's even farther away. Don't do that. It's going to be something closer. D, the writing of the Federalist Papers. Who can remind us what the Federalist Papers were about? What were they for? Sonnet. Sonnet, tell us what the Federalist Papers were.
I think they were for to convince the people to ratify the Constitution. So that would have been even after the drafting of the Constitution.
Right.
So that's
Would have
definitely
been after that, right. It would have been before Washington's farewell address. It would have been better than that. But yeah, common sense is taking this declaration of the causes and necessity of taking up arms to the next level. And we should be independent. We don't need them at all. In fact, we hate monarchy. We hate the idea of monarchs. It's stupid, you know? So it's taking that idea and building on it. It's going to the next level. Great. Okay, very good. We're moving along through time. Let's see the next. Okay. So this is a historian, okay, Woody Holton. He's an African-American historian, by the way. And so let's see. So he's going to be talking about, well, why don't we do it? Can I have a volunteer? How about Ashwin? You're always a good reader for these. Can you read this Woody Holton passage for us to refresh us? Ashwin might have, can you hear me, Ashwin? I think Ashwin can't hear me. Let's see. Who can I have as a volunteer reader? Not Saraga, she's riding in her car. We don't want her to get sick. How about Chloe? And then we'll get Kale, we'll get you for another one. Okay, how about Chloe?
Okay. As its preamble promised, the Constitution would ensure domestic tranquility by allowing the federal government to field an army powerful enough to suppress rebellions like those that had flared up in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and other states. Even more important, the Constitution would establish justice by preventing the state assemblies from adopting relief measures that screen their citizens from either their continental taxes or their private debts. Excoriating the legislatures for collecting too little money from taxpayers, the bondholders and their sympathizers noted with approval that the Constitution would take the business of collecting federal taxes away from the states and place it firmly in the hands of a powerful new national government.
Excellent, very good. And if you don't know what excoriating means, they did tell you it means harshly criticizing. Very good. Okay, so let's just look at the first question. The others did pretty well on, but the first one was a little confusing. Which of the following historical events in the 1790s most directly followed? That means we want something within the shortest time period of all of these, probably, and that relates, of course. Most directly followed from the developments described in the excerpt. Okay, A, trade and manufacturing increased U.S. productivity and helped the federal government pay off its bonds more quickly. Helen says, boo, boo hiss. No, right. It took a while to get our feet. We went through some rough economics times. B, George Washington's neutrality allowed the U.S. to trade with France, Britain, and Spain simultaneously and pay down the debt. That might be a little confusing, but Roshan says no. Okay, let's read the others and we'll discuss them. C, the federal government granted French merchants a monopoly on the sale of American tobacco to pay debts from the American Revolution. That's just never happened. That's an example of not something that's, well, it happened, but it's not the right answer. This just didn't happen. So now we're left with D. The federal government established a new economic policy, in part by assuming states' debts from the American Revolution. Joyce is saying yes. She's shaking her head. Why do you think that's the right answer, Joyce? You are correct.
Right. So I remember when I was doing this, the others just kind of seemed like unrealistic, and this was something that did directly follow like right after the Revolutionary War with George Washington and his administration.
Yes, or following directly after the Constitution. And the Constitution has to come first because that's what Woody Holton, the historian, is talking about. And then they took over. Remember, that was one of Hamilton's. How many people have seen Hamilton? That was one of Hamilton's big ideas. Like the U.S. government should take over all these state debts. The states won't have any more debts. We will take them over and we'll pay them back in a responsible way, or we'll manage the debt. And then the states can't be doing stupid things that'll cause local rebellions, that kind of idea. And yeah, good. Okay. But the others were pretty good there. Okay, next one, moving along chronologically. Okay, so this we have a woman's question, a woman historian, and we're talking about women and their role in antebellum America. What does antebellum mean? Quick review of that term. How about Chloe? What does antebellum mean? Antebellum mean?
It means before the Civil War.
Right. It doesn't mean against war. That'd be antebellum. The antebellum means before, antecedent. Yeah, it means coming before. Yeah. So, think of, like 3 or 4 decades before the Civil War. Okay. So we're talking about that time period. Okay, and number 16 and 17 both were confusing. 17 a little bit more. Okay, so let's look at 16 first. Let's read the question. If we need to go back to the passage, we will. 16. During the first half of the 19th century, some women increasingly bolstered the household income, as described in the excerpt, by A, obtaining positions in textile mills, B, signing contracts for indentured servitude, C, performing clerical and secretarial labor for large corporations, D, participating in secular and religious reform associations. So which one is the right one here? I'll tell you which ones. Roshan, which do you think is the right one here?
So because they're talking about the income, I think it's the textile mills, like Lowell's mills, Lowell's Farm Girls or something it was called.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Lowell mills and then other textile mills. They're the most well known. They were the first ones to really do it, but others did it too. Yeah, women were some of the main workers at these textile mills. Now, usually it wouldn't be like married women. Usually it'd be like young women, like think teenage girls or early 20s, like before they got married, would come in. But yeah, they were probably often sending money back home. They were helping out their household. And the textile mills, why wouldn't they have done that back in the 1750s? Sonnet.
The Industrial Revolution hadn't happened yet, so there weren't really textile mills.
They hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah.
Right. You agree, Saraga? Yeah, right. Textile mills, no one would have known. It'd be like talking back in my day of saying like, gosh, I think it'd be really fun to get on the internet and have a job doing that and, sell things online. It was like, no one had thought of the idea, it would have been science fiction. So that was the same idea. Women would have gotten jobs or made a little side money by maybe spinning wool and weaving and selling their wool or linen that they had made at home on their own spinning wheel and their own, big loom. People did that certainly, but they wouldn't have been factories. Textile mills, right. Okay, and let's look at 17 because this is one that was even more confusing. Oh, some people, we did have 2 people who thought and again, probably just reading the question quickly, got mixed up on the time period. They said performing clerical and secretarial labor for large corporations. Why is that one not correct?
No large corporations.
No, large corporations had not been invented yet. The typewriter had not been invented yet. You know, women didn't have clerical positions. That was something that came about when the typewriter was invented and became widespread. Then they decided, they kind of made a concerted thing. I don't know if any of you, I usually give links about that to some kids, that manufacturers of typewriters began making them look, what can you say, flowery. They put cute little flowery designs on original typewriters to make them look like a woman's appliance, a woman's thing, kind of like sewing machine had looked in the old days. And they did a lot about, oh, women's delicate fingers, you know, that are so nimble on the piano are equally good at the keyboard, you know, at the typewriter keyboard, that sort of thing. And it was promoted as a woman's job. And once kind of the rule of thumb at that time period would be, if it becomes a woman's job, is a guy going to do it? Nopers. If it was a man's job, would a woman do it? A few brave women, but not generally. It wouldn't be, you know, they were pretty segregated, and partly it was the idea that, you know, we've got to keep them segregated, or the women will be taken advantage of. You know, the men will make sexual advances on these women and ravage them in the workplace. And that happens today even. So it's, you know, it's not that far-fetched, but that was their thinking. And yeah, but yeah, none of those things, secretarial labor did not exist in the first half of the 19th century. Okay. But here we're having a question. You know how a lot of these questions, they usually have in each set of questions is going to be one that's going to try to relate to a later time period, or it's a common type of question. So let's look at this. The growing number of women in the workplace in the second half of the 20th century, that's my time period, kids, most directly contributed to A, the widespread belief that women's roles in the home should be abandoned entirely. B, the ratification of a constitutional amendment guaranteeing women's equality. C, legislation that restricted women's paid work to certain occupations. D, increased social anxieties about the decline of the traditional nuclear family. Roshan says that was a good one. Why, Roshan? Why is that the good answer? Saraga agrees. We'll get her opinion too. Hey, what do you think, Roshan?
Well, in that time, what do you call it? You could see that fear with the Stop ERA movement with Phyllis Schlafly, and then just the general conservative movement in general.
Right.
But especially the Stop ERA movement.
And that choice B, that was the favored choice, wrong answer. The Equal Rights Amendment never did pass. It did get stopped. It almost passed, and then it didn't. Okay. And they had a time length on how long they could take before the whole thing would be dead and they'd have to start from scratch. And there's still people who are trying to get it started again, you know. But it had a time limit and they didn't reach it, and by the time the time limit was up, you know, Phyllis Schlafly had come in, and so that got nixed. So that B didn't happen. And but again, here you would not need to have read this passage to be able to answer that question. It's just sort of bouncing off. Okay, we're talking about women working in the early 19th century, and now we're making a comparison or a jump or a leap in thinking to the late 20th century. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay. We're going to look at the first question here. So this is a map. Let me make this smaller so we can really see it. Okay, so we've got a map. So this is a map showing what? At what time? How about Aiden? Can you describe what we're seeing here on this map? Can you see it there? Oh, wait, I can't hear you. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. We're looking at areas settled in the United States from 1800 to 1820.
So a pretty narrow time period. Again, we're moving up slowly through time. Right. And so the darker it is, that's the later it's settled. And, some of these areas that are, shown as pale, no settlement, they're still pretty pale and sparsely populated right now. These are mountainous areas, wilderness areas still. Okay. So they're showing a gradual progression going west. Okay, so the question, let me make this bigger here now. The question that gave people trouble was the first two, 18 and 19. So let's look at both of them. Which of the following most directly contributed to, how can you translate that in your mind? Caused, okay? Was a cause of. Which of the following most directly contributed to the spread of settlement depicted on the map? A, the development of transcontinental railroads. Why can't that be the right answer? KL, why can't that be the right answer? Oh, wait, you're muted, KL. KL, can you?
I don't think that the railroads weren't uh, built till like the 1870s, I think.
Well, yeah, finished and really working well by then. Yeah, they started right at the end of the Civil War, and there really weren't even railroads at this time. By 1820, I mean, people are tinkering around and inventing things that were essentially toys, but there were not railroads that people were traveling on. Okay, by 1820, that's going to be a little bit later. At this time, they thought canals, the wave of the future, and those got bumped out by the railroads a few decades later. But yeah, so that can't be it. Okay, the choice B, efforts to secure boundaries with Great Britain. Why can't that be correct? Helen, do you have an idea on why that can't be the correct answer?
Well, this is past the American Revolution, so I think Great Britain was already kicked out of America by then.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we were still having some trouble because this would be the War of 1812. The British were still out in some of those old forts and things, but yeah, boundaries. Yeah, not such a thing. Or that was more like boundaries with Canada, which was still a British, colony, territory. But that's up north. That has nothing to do with this east to west growth. Right, very good. It's too far past that time we were having severe problems with Great Britain. Okay, what about this one? Federal grants for purchases of Western land. That was the favored wrong answer. At least 4 students thought that was it. Why can't that be? Or why is D is the correct answer? Sustained population growth after the American Revolution. Why is that better than federal grants for purchases of Western land? How about Tabitha?
Because the federal grants for the purchase of Western land would refer to the Homestead Act, which I believe was passed during the Civil War. So it's too early for federal grants.
Right. Remember, they could pass the Homestead Act and the Transcontinental Railroad Act during the Civil War because the southern states, which had opposed those measures, were not there to vote. They were boycotting Congress. by seceding, and so they couldn't have any say on it. So it's like, okay, well, while the cat's away, the mouse will play. And they passed those, right? But yeah, that's more federal grants for purchases of Western land would more sound like the Homestead Act. So yeah, it's really just showing like, yeah, the population of really grew after the American Revolution. People, if we had all stayed in the East Coast colonies, it would have gotten pretty crowded. So that would be the best idea. Kale?
Um, I was kind of surprised that there was so many white spots in the map where there was nobody living. But after the test, I like did some research, and there was only like I think 9 million people living in America in 1820s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
A lot of people, but yeah. And this
Mhm.
this like this little white area up here, anyone know what that physical feature is? What's going on up there in upstate New York? We have any New Yorkers here? You from?
Canal building.
What's that?
Canal building.
Well, canals were more like right here.
Oh shit.
This is mountains. These are the Adirondack Mountains. These are really high mountains. So you just can't build cities and towns. It's still wilderness today. It's big parks and, national parks and that sort of thing, state parks. People go camping there. My son went on his honeymoon with his wife there many, many years ago. And this area, I mean, it's not really that a little bit mountainous, but it's just heavily wooded, and somehow it just got ignored. It's still tiny towns, huge swaths of woods. It's still not populated. One of these counties is called Elk County, and the big draw to that county is to go to this state park and see elk, the big moosey type animals. They're still not populated. In this area here would be very mountainous. This would be now West Virginia, but here it's shown as part of Virginia because it was. Yeah, and the same thing here is probably big mountains. Okay. So good. And keeping with that, why aren't these settled? That's what question 19 is about. Which of the following most likely accounts for the limits of U.S. settlement in portions of North Carolina and Georgia depicted on the map? Okay, so here's Georgia and this big white swath here. That means it's not settled by Americans. It's probably lived in by who? Roshan?
The Native Americans, right? Like that would be, I think, the Northeastern, the Cherokee, and those.
Cherokees, and right. There are a lot of Cherokee here. Yeah, so the Native American tribes, American Indians, right? And this is North Carolina. So just that little part there, that would be a Cherokee area. It's still, have you ever been, Sonnet, you're in North Carolina. Have you ever been out to the Cherokee area of North
Yeah,
Carolina?
actually I have. I went to the Native Cherokee reservation there. It was pretty
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
it's still a reservation there, right? It's a big tourist thing. I was there when I was a little girl. I remember it well because one of my aunts who had no children was there with us because she lived in North Carolina in Asheville. And my sister and I were playing in a big stream at this picnic area. And my aunt was saying, they're going to fall in that water and they're going to get all wet and ruin our day if they get their clothes all wet. And of course, I fell in the water and got my clothes all wet. So she was yelling at me, and I got to buy a special t-shirt, which was not that common to buy t-shirts from tourist places for my family at that time. I got to get a special t-shirt from the Cherokee, souvenir stand. And I was over there. So yeah, it's going to have something to do with the Indians. Let's see which area has Indians listed in it. A, tobacco and sugarcane crops failed to thrive in those areas. Okay, that might not be why they didn't move there. B, American Indians maintained sovereign control over those areas. That sounds like American Indians. Notice they use the term American Indians here. People are always wondering, like, what term do I use? Should I say Native American? Should I say indigenous people? Should I say Cherokees? You know, they say American Indians. That's what most Indians, American Indians, say too. C, the Northwest Ordinance prohibited slavery in those regions. Why is that wrong here? We're talking about these areas. Where does the Northwest Ordinance impact? Ephraim.
The Northwest Ordinance in the Ohio River Valley area, so like near Cincinnati and all that entire area right
That's
there,
up here.
up north, yeah.
Yeah, up north. And so it just has to do with this area up here, which they're not so big, widely populated too, but that wasn't the reason. It was just like, well, it was the wilderness. But yeah, here and then D is, which this was a popular wrong choice. The lands were set aside for American Indian reservations. Why is that not, why is B the better choice? American Indians maintained sovereign control over those regions. Roshan? What do you think, Roshan?
This was before the reservation system really picked up speed, right? So the government was still recognizing them as their own individual nation. They weren't like charges of the government kept on reservations where no one would have to worry about them.
Exactly. Exactly. The reservation system hasn't really started. It would be coming, but it wasn't there by 1820. Okay, very good. Okay, moving along here. Let's, okay. Next we have Matthew Perry, Commodore Matthew Perry, to the Emperor of Japan in a letter. Actually, you all did really well on this, but I just wanted to share with you. Does anyone share something about this as 1850s? What do you know about Commodore Perry? It's often just kind of ignored because it doesn't take place in America. But what does anyone know about this? Anyone know anything about Commodore Perry and the land of the shogun in the land of Japan? Sonnet and then Ashwin. Wait.
So I think Commodore Perry didn't he brought battleships to Japan and forced them to trade with him?
Yeah. You trade
I
or
think
else.
possibly, or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Because Japan was an insulated nation. It was an island. They wanted to stay insulated. They liked being insulated. They're still. I was listening to some YouTube video about, the terrible population problems they're having in Japan right now, where no one's having children and no one's getting married, that type of thing. And it's a real problem. And they said, well, we could solve this problem by encouraging immigration, but, well, us Japanese don't really like immigration. We're a very homogeneous society. We're Japanese. We want to keep it Japanese. It's always been Japanese. And that was the way the Japanese have always felt. They've borrowed things from other cultures, certainly, and people have immigrated there, but it's not a big, they don't try to encourage immigration. It's never been their thing. And so they were pretty happy to be completely isolated and cut off from other nations. But the US decided that we really needed to trade with Japan. And so Commodore Perry was sent over. And I just wanted to show you, you all did well on these two questions, but I just wanted to show you some of the artwork Can you see this here? Let me see if I can make this bigger. I love that this is, can you see these? Are you seeing these? This is how the Japanese drew the Americans. I just love it. I just think they're really a hoot. And or this one, they really thought Americans were really bizarre looking and oh, here, I like this one because this is what Commodore Perry looked like. This is how the Japanese depicted him. I thought it was great. But he finally got his ways. I don't know if they show any pictures here. Oh, here's one of the ship that this is how the Japanese showed the American ship, which really didn't look quite so like with faces and everything. But that's how they depicted it. But they were quite amazed. But they finally won over the Japanese and started trading. Okay, so you all did actually pretty well on those ones. So we are not going to discuss them, but it's an interesting topic. Okay, Roger B. Taney, this is a question Tabitha wants us to talk about. And by the way, kids, you can leave at any time if you need to, go eat dinner or go whatever you need to do. I'll stay here till 10 o'clock if anyone wants to, just to keep going over some further questions, because I know we're not going to get over everything. But Tabitha specifically wanted us to talk about 24. Was that the one? No. No, wait, we're not up to that yet. Oh, wait. Here we go. Yeah, 20. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Tabitha wanted us to talk about question 24. So this is a selection from the Dred Scott case. Okay. Remember that? Who can tell us in 1 minute or less what the Dred Scott case was about? You from?
Basically said that like African American slave were not citizens of the United States.
Right. So they couldn't even sue in court. They couldn't raise the case, therefore the case was moot. And yeah, so that sort of thing, exactly. So the first question about this is, the decision in the excerpt held which of the following to be unconstitutional? And Tabitha thought it was the Northwest Ordinance. And tell us why you thought that would be a good, like if you were discussing or debating it, why would you say that was a good choice?
Yeah, so now I see, I don't totally understand this
Yeah.
quite, but so my thought was, so the decision in Scott v. Sanford ruled that the government could not regulate slavery, that they did
Yes.
not have the power to abolish it.
Mhm.
So the Northwest Ordinance, it was not under the Constitution, but it did ban slavery. And I thought I remember reading somewhere that one of the things that was declared unconstitutional by the decision was the Northwest Ordinance because it banned slavery in what became Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan.
Yeah, that Northwest.
But it also would have, I guess, made the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional.
I mean, I
So
think
is this
I can definitely see your line of thinking, and that was the popular choice for the wrong answer. I believe in the decision, and we'd have to look through and search for Missouri Compromise, but I think very specifically he says, because as the Supreme Court justice, as a Supreme Court ruling, they can say that certain laws are unconstitutional, and they're going to say the Missouri Compromise as a law was really unconstitutional. And the Northwest Ordinance, because it wasn't a law under the Constitution originally, although it was adopted as one of the first laws passed under the Constitution, they just said, oh yeah, we're going to grandfather that in right away. We're going with that. But I think it probably doesn't specifically address it. And actually, Abraham Lincoln will make a big deal out of this, Tabitha, in his speech. And the Dred Scott decision is what brought Abe Lincoln back to politics, by the way. He wouldn't have become president if it weren't for the Dred Scott decision, because it ironed him so much. And he made, he had a huge speech about how, because of the, excuse me, because of the Northwest Ordinance being made by people before the Constitution, but many of those same people became legislators under the Constitution, that they must have believed that the government had a role to play. So Lincoln actually makes a big deal out of this, that the Northwest Ordinance proved that the federal government does have a role to play. And maybe Tawney, remember his name, which looks like Taney, is really pronounced Tawny, but that won't matter in your AP exam. Maybe by mistake, Tawny didn't mention the Northwest Ordinance. I don't know. Maybe if he'd thought, oh yeah, I have to mention that too. But he did, apparently, I don't think he mentioned it specifically by name, but I think by name he mentioned and said the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. But you have a good point. That was the best wrong choice. And that was the one that, most people picked if they got it wrong. So that's one that could be debated and discussed. And you made a good point. That maybe the Missouri Compromise wouldn't have come about if the Northwest Ordinance hadn't been in place. Okay. 26, all of these were kind of tough, relatively. I mean, most people got them right, but a number of people got confused on them. Let's look at 26. Which of the following was the most immediate? Okay, we're thinking like a year, 2 years, whatever's the shortest. Which of the following was the most immediate result of the decision of the excerpt? So do they want something before this decision or after the decision? Ashwin.
So yeah, after the decision, because it's a result.
It's a result of that
then,
decision.
Yeah,
So let's look at them, okay? Tensions over slavery diminished. That's what they hoped. That's what they were looking for, but it didn't happen. B, support grew for the Republican Party. Who was a very important Republican who got back into politics because of this decision? Abe Lincoln, okay? C, the U.S. fought a war with Mexico. Why is that not right? That happened before on the timeline. That happened in 46 to 48. That happened before the compromise of what important year? Ephraim.
Oh God. Wait. I'm blanking. Kansas? Wait.
The name of the compromise is the year it was passed.
Oh,
And
compromise of 1850.
the compromise of 1850.
I'm thinking of the
Both
I'm thinking of the
validate-
Kansas-Nebraska Act.
Right, that was a little bit later, but the compromise of 1850 was after the war with Mexico, right? Okay, and D, choice, most slave states voted to secede from the Union. Now, several people went for that one. Why is that not the best answer? Most slave states did secede from the Union. Roshan?
It wasn't the most immediate. First, the Republican Party gained power, Abe Lincoln became president, and then they seceded.
Exactly. Exactly. Or he was voted in. I mean, they began seceding before he got inaugurated, but they knew he was going to be president. Very, very good. And you can't have something be a result of something if it happened before. It's the other way around. Great. Okay. And this 27, several people missed also, so it was confusing. Which of the following invalidated the decision in the excerpt? So invalidated decided that this was not, it made it null and void. You can't, this decision no longer stands. Okay. A, the 14th Amendment. B, Plessy versus Ferguson. C, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. D, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Which one went against the Dred Scott decision? Which nullified it? How about Joyce? What do you think on that one? Do you have any thoughts on that or questions or guesses? You can be wrong. It's okay.
I think it was the 14th Amendment because it said that everyone, including Black people, have protected rights under the law and the same rights as a citizen does.
Yes, they said they were citizens. Very, very good. That was that key thing that Dred Scott decision said, oh no, they can never possibly ever be citizens. No one thought they would ever be citizens. That's not in the definition of being a citizen. And now it said specifically, anyone born here is a citizen. Doesn't matter about your race. Okay. Sebastian, you've got a thought. You were raising your hand. I see you.
It's funny. I was rereading some of my PSDAs recently for review,
Excellent.
and it was funny because in the Dred Scott decision, Taney said, like, now if the founding fathers really thought Black people were equal with white people, and then if they meant to include them in all men, then how could they have owned slaves? It was the same problem of hypocrisy and cognitive dissonance that's been raised so many times since. But he had this sort of reverence for the founding fathers and assumed that great men like them never acted against their principles, and thus he was sure that they had never really meant Black people.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, that's a very interesting thing. Thank you. Great. And I mean, I'm glad people recognize Plessy versus Ferguson had something important to do with things. What is the key phrase associated with Plessy versus Ferguson? Roshan? You'll recognize it.
Desegregation, right?
Yes, has to do with segregation. What's the phrase is like a helpful one to keep in your mind, and you might need a refresher. You'll recognize it, Joyce, when you hear it. Sebastian?
Separate but equal.
Yes.
And in second place is the word octoroon.
Ah, okay, good.
What?
Yeah,
I'm
separate,
kidding. Yeah, that's separate but equal.
separate but equal. Then it's okay. It's legal as long as it's separate but equal. Of course, it was never equal, and it was only separate and unequal, but no one noticed that. And Brown versus, these two are always paired. Plessy versus Ferguson got thrown out by Brown versus Board of Education. That was that 1950s school decision. Right. Okay. Let's see. Let's move on. Oh, here in the next one. Okay, this was an interesting primary document from 1870. Notice how they've completely skipped over the Civil War here, right? Zero, nada questions about the Civil War itself. No questions about battles, nothing. Let me know if that happens on this year's exam. It's a very common occurrence. There are many kids who are very upset about that every year. They didn't even have any questions about the Civil War battles or anything. But they didn't do that. They did that this year. Okay, this 2019 exam. So this is this guy describing pioneers of civilization. What's happening? And let's look at question number 29, because that was pretty confusing to a lot of people. And we'll go back to this if we need to. Which of the following was a long-term result of the developments described in the excerpt? So they're describing the excerpt, they're describing, what's leading to this new settlement out in the Western prairies. A, the growth of political tensions between the US and Mexico, a long-term result of those developments. B, a conflict with Great Britain over the northern border of the US. C, that was a popular choice. C, a large-scale African-American migration to the region. That was a very popular choice. And then there's D, the creation of farmers' groups to resist corporate control of agricultural markets. So here we're looking at long-term results. So we may have to go back and read. Let's look at this and see which we think is the best. Sebastian, do you want to read this? George Batchelder, a sketch
Sure.
of the
Oh,
Dakota.
that's funny, actually. I have a friend whose last name is Batchelder, and they were a really big, family in New Hampshire history. Anyway,
Okay, well, he's well
formerly,
educated.
formerly the individual was the pioneer of civilization. Now the railroad is the pioneer, and the individual follows, or is only slightly in advance. The wild roses are blooming today, and the sod is yet unturned, where in a year or two will be heard the screech of the locomotive and the tramp of the approaching legions. Another year will bring the beginning of the change. Towns and cities will spring into existence, and the steam whistle and the noise of saws and hammers, and the click and clatter of machinery, the sound of industry will be heard. The prairies will be golden with the ripening harvest, and the field and the forest, the mine and the river will all yield their abundance to the ever-growing multitude.
Right. You know what this reminded me of? This passage. Did anyone ever read, not Little Town on the Prairie, but maybe By the Shores of Silver Lake, the Laura Ingalls Wilder book? Did you ever read those, Joyce? Those Laura Ingalls Wilder books about pioneer life? Laura and
Are you
Mary.
asking me?
Yeah, I'm just,
I think I read The Little House on the Prairie, but I don't know if I read the ones you just mentioned afterwards.
yeah. They're as she's growing up a little bit older, but By the Shores of Silver Lake, you should read it now this week, Joyce. I've often thought of this when I'm thinking about this time period, because this is the time period that they're talking about, and they were in the Dakota Territory. And Laura's father, by that time, gets a job working for the railroad, helping survey or helping doing paperwork or something. He's working for the railroad. They move out to this new area that has nothing, but they're building a railroad through it. There's no town, there's nothing. And he builds a little shack for them to live in. And he's working for the railroad, and they go out and they watch the railroad being built through nothing. There's no settlement there. But by that spring, oh, now that the railroad is in, they're sending in boards and lumber because there are no trees out there to build with, in particular. They're shipping in lumber, and within 3 months, there's a whole town. And then people are starting to farm their homesteads. So it's very much, if any of you might have that book at home, reading that chapter about building the railroads, which I first had 2 boys and then 2 girls, and my boys just loved that chapter. They thought that was so fascinating. And they had a little family that we saw a lot at that time, a homeschooling family that had 2 girls and then a couple of little boys. The 2 girls thought that was the most boring chapter of the whole book. They wanted the stuff about the pretty dresses and all this. They wanted the girly parts, and they thought that was so boring. I'm like, really? Oh, my boys loved that. They would act that out for weeks, with little toy trains. And but yeah, it's fascinating, but it really describes exactly what he's talking about here. I'm sure Laura Ingalls Wilder read this book, this passage. She lived it. She was there when this happened. Um, so and yeah, the long-term thing would be those farmers who have come there to plant the grain and everything. That's what this is about. They're going to start in the long term, in another 15 to 20 years, they're going to be starting, what's the name of their party they're going to start? Their political party? Starts with P. Roshan.
The populist.
A populace. You recognize that, Joyce? The populace. There's like two types of memory. There's like the memory that we can pull it out of our head, and there's the memory that says, oh yeah, I recognize that. And usually on the APUSH exam, you can do pretty well with, I recognize that. I recognize that idea. You might not have been able to pull it out of your head by the proper name. That can help on the essays. But always, by the way, view the MCQs as being ways to review specifics. Because when you get to the essays, which are coming after, or the SAQs and the LEQs and DBQ, you'll have just gone through all this entire review of all of US history. And you've been refamiliarized with, like right now, Joyce, you'll remember the Populist Party because we've just reviewed it. You'll probably have that on the tip of your tongue on Friday when you might need it. But if you hadn't reviewed it, you'd recognize it if you heard it, but you might not be able to pull it up. So that's why it's helpful to review. Okay, let's move on. I'm not going to go through every question because we do need to stop. Okay, this is a good one because a lot of people missed number 33. They found this one challenging. Albert Beveridge. Sounds like a beverage you drink, but this is a guy who did become a US senator. And I've never read this speech before, the March of the Flag speech. And what would you say the tone of this speech is if you look over it pretty quickly here? And even to hear it's called the March of the Flag speech. What do you think the tone is here? What side of things would he be on? Roshan.
He looks very pro-imperialist to me.
Yeah.
So like America getting out there, getting the Philippines, all of that. It looks
Right.
to me like he would be for all of that.
He would be for all of that, right? The March of the Flag, we're taking it all over the world. Great. Hyper patriot, hyper yeah, let's spread the good word all over. And yeah. And he goes back, it's interesting, he goes back to Jefferson. It's always good if you can give yourself like say biblical stuff. You say, oh, well, here's the proof text for that. So that means this point of view that our church has, or our Jewish group says, this is where we get that from. It's right here. It's in the text. And for a politician, if you can go back to an historical figure and say, oh, they believe exactly what I believe. And he was a founding father. He's someone we all admire. So he's going back to Jefferson. He says, Jefferson, who dreamed of Cuba as an American state. Jefferson, the first imperialist of the Republic. He's saying Jefferson would be just like us at the end of the 19th century. Jefferson acquired that imperial territory, which swept from the Mississippi to the mountains, from Texas to the British possessions, and the march of the flag began. So he's saying we're just, that idea of continuity or change. He's saying we're just continuing what Jefferson started. We're not doing anything different. We're continuing. And other people would disagree with that. They would say, no, 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 no. This is a complete change. This is wrong. This is terrible. Yeah, the other stuff was different. No, So yeah, he's saying we got to move on. So let's look at 33 was the one that was most challenging. Beveridge's speech was written in the context of, so what was happening at that time period? In the context of, and look at the date, 1898. In the context of A, war with Great Britain during the James Madison administration. Bib. Efforts to gain concessions from Mexico through conflict. Now that was the one that most people chose if they chose wrong. And I think people always get mixed up with the Spanish-American War that we're fighting with Mexico, because they think it's all the same. Spain, Mexico, it's all the same, but they're not. Do you know when Mexico got its independence from Spain, stopped being a Spanish colony? Around when? It was a lot earlier. It was back in like the I don't know the exact date, but around the 1820-ish time, in that decade, okay, that they broke away from Spain. So they were already free. They weren't part of the Spanish-American War. That was between Spain and the US over Cuba, which still was a Spanish territory. Okay, C, debates in the aftermath of war with Spain. Yeah. What war with Spain? That's the right one. Or D,
The Spanish-American War,
yeah,
which was a
Spanish-American
little
War. Right. Pretty easy name to remember.
not evident name.
Right. Not a very creative name. D, the decision to avoid war with France during the John Adams administration. Way earlier, right? If we're talking about 1898 and we're talking about the context, they want to know what's happening right then. Okay, what's happening right then? Like really the historical situation might be even a better way to put it. What was happening then? The larger context might be some of these other things, but the immediate context is that the war with Spain. But people who got it wrong chose this one, and they probably didn't even read choice C. They just saw that, grabbed it, and moved on. Okay. We do a couple more questions. Okay, we got a Jane Addams question. She usually comes up. She's writing about why women should vote. What's she most known for? Like, what do you first think of Jane Addams when you think of her? What do you connect her with? What do you salivate over? Joyce, do you have anything you think of about hers? Name mean anything to you? Never heard of the lady.
Whole houses.
Mm-hmm. Whole houses, helping immigrants, right? Getting other women. This was a thing that like reasonably wealthy, well-to-do, maybe not wealthy, but well-to-do women who wanted to do good in the world and do something meaningful with their time, and who usually were not married, did not have children of their own. They were usually single women, would work in these settlement houses. This was something they could do. And okay, so she's talking about why women should vote. So we're really, this question 35 says, Adams' ideas expressed in the excerpt have most in common with which of the following historical views about women? Okay, so she's writing in 1910. So we're going to need to probably find something that's going to be from around, well, let's look at the choices, and we might go back and see what she says. The 17th century Puritan belief that women must be governed by their husbands and fathers. Do you think Jane Addams would be thinking that? Probably not. Okay, those Puritan women would not be campaigning for the right to vote. Okay, that wouldn't have been in their view of things. Okay, so that's probably not it. B, the belief of some mid-19th century reformers that women could act as the moral voice in society. Roshan's not so sure on that. What do you think, Joyce? Joyce thinks maybe there's a possibility. Let's read that. Ephraim says no. Joyce says yes. I agree with Joyce. Let's say
I didn't see the other answers yet, though.
okay, well,
So
let's look at the other answers. Okay. C, the argument of some 19th century advice books that women's sphere was restricted to the home and family. Does that sound like a point of view of someone who's writing why women should vote? It doesn't, does it? Their point of view would be like, let the guys take care of that voting stuff. Our most important role, our sacred role, should be in the home. Okay. D, the rejection of traditional gender roles by feminists in the mid-20th century. So they're looking ahead, okay, like 50 years later, or 60 years later. So let's see what she's saying. Let's read it here. To turn the administration of our civic affairs wholly over to men may mean that the American city will continue to push forward in its commercial and industrial development and continue to lag behind in those things which make a city healthful and beautiful. If women have in any sense been responsible for the gentler side of life, which softens and blurs some of its harsher conditions, may they not have a duty to perform in our American cities? If woman would fulfill her traditional responsibility to her own children, if she would educate and protect from danger factory children who must find their recreation on the street, then she must bring herself to the use of the ballot, that latest implement for self-government. Which one now do you think is the best answer? Are you ready to take a stand, Joyce?
I think it's B.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Yes. Be brave, Joyce. Be brave. You're right. Sebastian, you've got a thought on this one?
Yeah, originally I wasn't sure it was B because some of those 19th century reformers argued that like that was the role of women to act as the moral voice instead of voting. But Jane Addams is here arguing that women are acting as the moral voice by voting.
Yes, exactly.
That they're and that by voting they're actually she's actually fulfilling her responsibility to her own children.
Yeah.
And not leaving it or augmenting it.
Yeah. Yep. And that was a common argument suffragettes, of the suffrage movement for women to vote, that, well, women are the moral voice of society, and we will do what's right. And I remember reading a surprising article, speaking of Laura Ingalls Wilder and the Little House books. She was actually a writer before she started writing children's books. She was a writer for some like women's farm magazines, probably had been populist sort of oriented magazines, magazines for farmers. And she would write, sort of a women's column. And she was against women getting the vote. She wrote against women getting the vote, and she thought this argument was stupid, that women would be the moral voice. She thought it wasn't true. And I mean, once women got the right to vote, I'm sure she voted, but and didn't argue with it, but she wasn't convinced that women would be indeed the moral voice of culture. But it was a popular argument that women would make in the early 20th century, and in some reformers in the 19th century. So that was a tricky one. Do you want to do one more, kids? One more. Just one more. Let's see. Find one that was
Miss Richmond, I have a question.
sure.
What would they mean by traditional gender roles? Like, how would we frame that in the context of APUSH?
Okay. They would say, what would you all say? What do you think that means? Okay, the whole sentence is, or phrase is, the rejection of traditional gender roles by feminists in the mid-20th century. So mid-20th century, that would be talking about who's an example of a feminist from the mid-20th century. What's her name? I can't even. Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan. Recognize that name? Who would say that women's roles should not be in the home, that women should be able to, gee, we got a college education, let us go out and have a career. And that would be the better role. Or that's what women should do. That would be going against the traditional gender role. Would be, okay, the wife is home wearing an apron and that's frilly, and cooking a pot roast for her husband and living in the nice suburb. Okay. And taking care of the kids and not being very smart, according to the feminists. I'm not saying I would agree, but that's what they would say. That would be their point of view. And they indeed denigrated the role of motherhood and child rearing. If pushed, they would say, oh, no, if women want to choose that, of course, it's fine. But they did denigrate it. That's all you can say. They did. I mean, I lived through that time period. They did denigrate it. They did say, you're an idiot if this is all that you want to do in life. And but those would be the traditional gender roles. That sort of, being a wife and mother. And okay, well, I think we better wind up here, because I don't want to keep you up to me. I could keep going, but you probably have something else you want to do. Okay, so good luck this week. I wish you all the best. I'll be thinking of you every day. And but yeah, this is it. This is our final live session, unless you all clamor and say we must have one more. I could do another. I don't think I have anything going on this. I could do one on Wednesday. I definitely wouldn't want to do anything on Thursday night, because that's the night before the exam. But is anyone here taking other AP exams? I know I've asked a couple of you. Sebastian, are you taking any others? What are you taking, Ephraim?
I don't even remember. AP English language,
Oh, that's next.
calculus, and well, they're all next week except APUSH,
Okay.
which kind of makes it stressful, but
Yeah.
I'm doing 3 others. Yeah.
I hope you don't have any 2 in the same day.
Oh, you jinxed it.
Oh, you do?
I have English language and physics together on one day, which kind of is rough, but
Oh, okay. Well, I hope you survive. You have to let us know if you survive. And definitely all of you check in. I will be watching like a hawk on Friday afternoon and early evening to see how you all did. I'll post that place where you can post how you survived. Are you taking any other exams, Joyce, this year? No, good, good. And you aren't Russian, you're just taking the one. Good. Well, I hope you all have a good day. Most people, I've never had an A pusher who didn't survive, who didn't make it through and come out smiling at the other end. So I hope that's the case for you. And okay, good luck. And it was great to see you once again. Hugs to you all. And I'll be thinking of you, okay? Bye-bye. Wave goodbye to everybody, guys.
Bye. Thanks for
Especially
the
nice to have you
fisherman.
here, Joyce.